My name is Reese, guys. How you doing?
Good.
Good morning. Let me first say you guys are awesome for being here and wanting to better your careers. You want to learn, that'll make you better, plain and simple. It's an amazing thing. I think everybody that's at this show, including all the guys on the Intens team and everybody that works for Intens, wants to be better at their jobs, plain and simple. And I think staying hungry to want to be better at what you do is the most important part about being a successful artist, being an artist who's fulfilled. Being better is something that I strive for on the regular. And I think wanting to learn and wanting to be better are kind of one and the same things. So I encourage you to stay there. Stay focused on learning and bettering yourself, because it's better your life, it's gonna better your career. And I mean, it goes without saying that knowledge is power. So stay hungry, stay focused on learning. My art career has always been one that I've always been hungry to learn new styles, new things. In tattooing and in all mediums, I'm just really intrigued with how different artists do different things and their process. I've always been obsessed with that. So for me, I've become that within my tattoo career. I've become like a guy that does all sorts of styles, and it's kind of like a blessing and a curse at the same time. I don't know if you guys like to focus in on one thing, because I know a lot of guys do. They like to master one thing, and that's awesome. But for me, I crave versatility, and that's something I like to talk about with anybody who's curious about my work. I think it helps to be versatile. So that's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to show you how. So yeah, that's the cover page. One thing I like to encourage, doesn't matter what medium you're in, draw a lot. Doesn't matter if you're a reproductive tattooer or a reproductive painter or a traditional tattooer or painter, draw a lot. It's going to help. You've all heard that a million times. I draw every day. If I do like a portrait tattoo or something that day at work, I'll go home and draw because I want my hand to move. I want to create something new. I just put in pencil to paper, or charcoal or something. It's gonna make your mind and your hand constantly like in sync. It's gonna create something that you can't take away if you're constantly doing. It's kind of like riding a bike. You can take a long break, learn how to ride a bike. It's different in that you need to constantly do it with your hands. You need to be creative. You're not gonna forget how to draw, but if you don't constantly create, constantly draw or paint, painting the same thing, like you're gonna have a detachment. And you don't want that. You want it to be like riding a bike. You're always gonna draw. Something I like to talk about, and it's something that I've been lucky enough to learn, and people have shared with me from a young age, is humility in tattooing and art. We're lucky. We make art for a living. That's a fucking cool thing. Sorry, I'll try not to cuss. We're lucky, but I'm sure to some degree or another, your whole lives you were encouraged to keep making art. You're awesome. Oh my gosh, you're so good at drawing. You're so good at painting. Whatever you did when you were a kid, that everybody was like, holy crap, you're good at that. That's a special feeling. That's probably why we're all here. It's from those early days of making art. But remember that that's a gift, and yeah, you focus on it, and yeah, you work hard to get better at it, but that is a natural gift. And you can always get better, but be grateful that you have that gift. Be grateful that you don't have to go have a shitty job that you hate. You get to freaking make art. Don't forget that. Be grateful, be humble, say thank you, be stoked that you get to do this. And don't stop learning. You're here, keep doing this shit. You're gonna get better. Keep learning. Keep drawing. So we talked about being versatile a little bit, but I think to be versatile is literally to be able to do lots of things. Let that expand as much as you can. If you've never If you've never sculpted, try sculpting. Ask some friends, like, hey, do you know anything about sculpting? Try sculpting. If you've never painted with oil, we've talked about painting already. Like, paint with oils, paint with acrylics, paint with watercolors. You want to try and stay versatile, because if you get better at another medium of art, it is going to directly influence the quality of your other mediums of art that you already know more about. Color theory kind of goes across the board. If you're good at one medium with color theory, you can start applying that to your tattoo work, your drawing, your other mediums of painting. Stay versatile. Within your tattooing, it's not necessary. It's not what everybody wants to do. For me, I kind of thrive off of trying new things. I like traditional tattoos. I like photorealistic tattoos, and I'm not going to say I'm great at either of them or any of the tattoos I do, but I like to do them, and I want to get better at each one. So for me, I want to get better at my personal private art, because it's going to affect the quality of my tattoo work, and I've seen that happen. The years of tattooing, I've proven that to myself, that by becoming better at all the mediums I'm into, it's making my tattoo work better. So yeah, let's keep going. So I will say, depending where your heart's at with tattooing and art, you can do all sorts of things, and you can learn the basics and apply it to your own style and stuff. Illustrative tattooing is really popular, has been booming for the last few years, and that's something that I like to remember, that there's trends and there's waves of things that come and go with tattooing. And there's a balance you need to find, and it's easier said than done. But if this is your career, this is how you pay your bills. Not saying money's everything, but if you need to put food on the table, I think it's smart to kind of watch and pay attention to the waves and the trends that are in the tattoo industry. Social media makes things come in and out so fast, but at the same time, we've seen realism be really big for several years now. We've seen this neo-traditional thing just kind of boom. And I like to pay attention. I like to see what my peers are up to. I'm inspired by guys' work every day, all day long. And if you're inspired by it, maybe that means you'd like to try it and try drawing it. But for me, I like being on top of some of the trends in tattoos, because I know in 10 years, 20 years, I'll still have a career, because if somebody comes in or writes me an email and says, hey, I kind of like all that other shit you do, but I want this black and gray tattoo, or I want this neo-traditional tattoo. And I confidently can say, okay, cool, I can do that for you. So it's something to remember with staying versatile, is that you can kind of help your career, you can create longevity there if you feel like you're a well-rounded tattooer. So I'll do stuff a little bit more illustrative. The colors are a little off, sorry. It's just the monitor, but then I'll do black and gray stuff, and I'll add stuff that's my style, or stuff that's just a realistic reproduction. I like being versatile within each piece too. It doesn't just have to adhere to every rule that you've ever been taught about traditional tattoos or realism. Make it your own. Keep your work versatile, not just the styles of work that you do. But don't forget to paint. Don't forget to draw. Keep it moving. Keep your mind going. I mentioned it earlier. Knowledge is power. Try all the mediums. Don't be afraid to draw if you have a cancellation, or paint or something. Just keep your hand moving. It's really going to help you. And if you stop, then your work's going to slow down. The quality of your work's going to slow down. So don't stop. Obviously you need your weekends and whatever, but do what you can to keep pushing and keep creating. Let's see. Don't forget to draw. Don't forget to paint. Try new things. I'm always fucking around with new stuff. I don't know if anybody here has seen it, but I got bored and started drawing on a book one day, and it turned into a thing I fell in love with. I love the way that the text comes through, a drawing or a painting and stuff. And even those things, I'm messing with it. I started just drawing on with pencil at first, and then ballpoint pen, and then I started throwing paint on it, and it works, and it made my eye look at my canvas a little bit differently. And then people started asking me for tattoos that looked like that. And then that's that's longevity in my career right there. Because I was drawing and putting it out there for the world, you know, somebody asked for a tattoo of it, and then now other people are asking for it, and that's pretty rad. And that's, you know, that's kind of what Billy was saying. You paint some stuff, you draw some stuff, people are going to be attracted to it eventually. Somebody's going to like it, and who knows, maybe that can be turned into a print that you can sell forever, or just somebody can wear it forever. That's pretty fucking cool. More stuff, you know, mixed media, don't be afraid to mix everything. Just like in tattooing, you can mix black and gray color, same as any other medium of art. Mix it, you know, like put like gold leaf and ink and colored pencil and all sorts of shit in there. And it just creates a dynamic, and your tattoo should kind of reflect that as well. There's a painting we did in Italy a couple of years ago with the Intense Creative Academy. Thank you, Billy, for hosting.
There you go. I like that one.
You know, like I'm a minimal, you know, oil painter, but I freaking love it. And I learned a lot because we took a course. You know, we took a course with a guy who knew what he was talking about. Take classes, keep doing this, you're gonna learn. That was like the best painting I ever did, like from life, and it's because I was around this environment, something like this, where we're at right now, where everybody's there eager and hungry to learn and get better. So keep doing that. Doodle everywhere. You know, that's a grocery list, I think. I just doodle. I saw it and I was like, that needs a skull on it. Keep drawing, keep your hand moving. Practice makes perfect. Don't be afraid to do several versions of something. Whether it's drawing or painting or whatever, you know, just keep doing it. There's some of those book pages I worked on. A friend of mine said, hey, can you draw a picture of my girlfriend on one of those book pages? I want to give it to her for, I don't know, her birthday or something. That's kind of weird, but I did it, and I wasn't happy with it, so I drew 6 versions of it. Finally, I was happy with it, so I did it. Keep painting. Take your notes, you know. Don't be afraid to, you know, I do this a lot with my tattoos. You guys, I'm sure, have done it. Take pictures of the process so you can look back and realize like what works for you, what doesn't work for you. Do it with your drawings. Do it with your tattoos. You know, this is just a few stages of a painting I did. That's a study. It's like an 8 by 10. You know, and that was, I think, like, you know, a few hours of work. It wasn't. I don't think it was that much in my memory, but you know, it's really, really interesting to watch. You know, the phases of something come together. It's just like a portrait in tattooing, right? Like sometimes you do a portrait and it's 75% of the way through and you're like, shit, I hope this is coming together. But it's, you really do those few extra steps and it's like, oh, there it is, you know? A couple colors does a lot. You know, at that beginning, that block in on the left, I was like, dude, I might throw this away. It just didn't look right, didn't feel right. And then I think I grabbed a cocktail and sat down for 5 minutes and I looked at it and I was like, okay, I can keep going. And then an hour later, I was there in the middle one, and it was like, okay, it's coming, and I just kind of like decided, just keep going, follow the process. You know it needs to be done. You know what you want it to look like in the end, and just keep moving your hand, and it got there. And not that it's a crazy cool painting or anything, but it was just simple. I forget that chick's name. She's some actress. I saw it in a magazine, but. Watch your process, and now I can go back and watch like how shitty I thought that was looking, and know that I can get there if I want to. And I like that. I like knowing that I can get there. So in tattooing specifically, you know, I'm sure most of you guys have been taught like in the beginning, you know, stick to the rules. You know what works. You know, do your lines, do your black shading, all that stuff. It's good. There's traditions and there are rules, unwritten rules that are always going to be there, and it's always good to remember them. But don't forget that we're artists. Like our whole life is a broken rule, and tattooing, you know, like everybody on the Intense team, you know, like they broke pretty much all the rules to get where they're at, and all of our other favorite tattooers and artists in the world. So yes, things are there for a reason, and timeless, you know, traditions are there for a reason, but don't be afraid to break some rules. Seriously, like, you know, you think you have to have just black lines, you know, no. You know, clearly you don't have to all the time. As long as you create contrast or whatever, you know, you can kind of do whatever you want now. And tattoos, they age with people. You can always touch them up. You know what I mean? I'm by no means an amazing portrait artist, but I like doing realism. I like doing portraiture. One of my clients asked me to do a portrait of his wife a while ago. I'm like, okay, cool, let's do it. But he wanted me to draw her not just make a stencil of like a printout photo. He wanted me to draw her and make my stencil off of that. And I was like, that's not going to be perfect, man. There's no way I can do that perfectly. He's like, I know. I want it to be more about like you being the artist, you creating the art with your hands, all that stuff. So I literally set her up in my studio, took some time to put up some decent lighting, and I drew her from life. And the top left, you can see that that was like my little life drawing, whatever, just quick. It was like an hour, and she just sat there for an hour. I mean, she's not a model, but she did all right. And I just drew that. I made it a little bigger, made a stencil of it, and then from there I tattooed it. And that's something I had never done before. I'd never even heard of that before, but it sounded kind of cool. It's similar to like, what you would do for an illustrative tattoo, but it was just something cool and different. Keep trying new things, and it'll work. And break the rules. Who cares? People are obviously there in your chair for a reason. They're ready to get tattooed by you, so they're entrusting you with a lot of stuff. Sometimes you just gotta go for it and be confident. Break those rules, because you know what? Shit's meant to be broken. I don't want to talk about tools too much. You guys all have your own tools that work for you. I like to use rotary tattoo machines. I think coils are great. I learned on coils. I love coils. I just don't like tuning them. I just want a tattoo, and tuning my coils always took away from tattooing to me. Not dogging it. It's just something for me that I just want a tattoo. So I use rotary machines. There's a million. You guys know about it. They're great. For me, I use Bishop. I work with the guy who started the company, Bishop Rotary. He's a tattooer. I like supporting tattoo-related products. Bishop Rotary is great. I like Neotats too. They're great. I use all sorts of needles, and I use cartridges sometimes, but usually just standards. I always use Mithra or Quadrin now, only really, but I used Mithra before, and they're great. Always check your needles. If anybody ever taught you that, it's crazy. Always check your needles, because they are barbed sometimes. Always check them. Let's see. With products, don't be afraid, keep that versatile as well. Don't be afraid to try new shit. Try new tattoo machines, always. Like, if somebody says, I got this new thing, it's dope, then ask him if you can borrow it when he's not working. See if it works for you. Don't be afraid to try new things. I know it's not cheap always, but, if you can find a way to better your art, better your technical prowess, do it, Simple as that, do it. And always check your needles, because that shit's barbed sometimes. All right, so contrast. I follow somewhat of I try and keep in mind the traditional theory of in threes, right? Like line work, black shading, and skin. And if it's not line work, it's contrasting things, hard edges that can separate, contrasting things in value, like black to skin. You should always think of your tattoos in a value scale. For me, it's 0 to 10, 10 being black, 0 being the person's skin. And remember that person's skin is not white. It's not white. I don't care how albino that person is. This is still whiter than them. For me, I don't like to rely on the color white, the pigment white, because it is always brighter than the person's skin. And I know that's kind of a thing that, in tattooing we always talk about, is highlights and creating lots of texture with white and stuff. But you can't rely on white too much, in my opinion. I like to rely on the person's skin. That's gonna outlast any pigment that you put in the skin. So find your blackest black. Intense makes like 3 blacks that I swear by. Obviously super true, and I like to mention black a lot. Mix your blacks, make the darkest black you can find, and don't be afraid to use the person's skin as your white. That's your value scale, 10 to 0, or 0 to 10, whatever you like. You can create contrast in a tattoo without line work, obviously, but you also want to create contrast with tones and colors, contrast is not just a black and white thing. Contrast is positive, negative, light and dark. So make sure to find contrast within your composition in a way that's that's interesting. You know, your details can be really in the foreground and really, really sharp. Contrast that with your background, make it blurry, make it soft. You know, pull things forward and push things back. That's contrast. Don't forget that contrast is hugely important. It's an invaluable thing to remember, that contrast will make dynamics. It'll make things interesting. Don't forget that. Depth of field is something that we can all kind of learn and apply to a simple tattoo. You know, like you have a foreground image and it's sharp and it's focused and all that stuff. Don't be afraid to do a little wash of gray or a little wash of, you know, like a light doled out color, just to make that foreground pop forward. That's contrast. You know, it's not just light and dark. Don't forget that. Let's keep going. Contrast. This is kind of a good example of some black and gray contrast. This is kind of washed out, but I knew that going into this tattoo I was going to have a lot of texture in the wolf, so I wanted the skin of the girl to be really, really soft, and it doesn't really look like it here too much, but other than that little tiny shadow under the cheek, everything under the eye is just that person's skin. I mean, that is verbatim like what heavy contrast is. You know, black hair, very minimal value in the hair, just the darkest black I could get, and then just skin. And I wanted that to be, you know, if I didn't do the wolf, it would have been a dynamic image by itself. But knowing that there was going to be a shit ton of texture and super rendered in that wolf's, you know, fur and stuff, I knew I wanted the contrast, the theme of contrast to be there as well, just between the faces. And you know, you have black, almost just black, one little value of gray under the cheek for the human face, and then like every, you know, shade in value scale on the wolf. That way, those things contrast. So each portion of this kind of can stand on its own as a nice little tattoo that's, you know, dramatic, but together they create a really dynamic, contrasting visual that I think it's interesting, and that's something I like to always focus on is contrasting imagery, contrasting value. Same as this is another good example. It's kind of, you know, totem pole style, but the face is obviously really simple. I didn't color those cheeks at all. I just shaded into it and left the person's skin. Same as the forehead. It just fades into that elbow. Whereas that contrasts with all the crazy, like, super rendered stuff at the bottom. That's a cover up, so there's some texture added. It's a little cracking, but there's a little cover up under the bottom section. But you know, that's contrast, not just the color and the tone, but it's contrasting the imagery. And it's kind of interesting because the eye doesn't know where to go to first. I don't know what you guys see first when you look at something like that. Most people will see the lips because they're red, but I always see that little cathedral pattern down here, the architecture. My eyes go to that. But other people I've asked, and they always go to the eyes or the lips or whatever. But that's contrast. Don't forget to create contrast. We talked about value already, but remember to use the value scale, 0 to 10, and remember that the person's skin is always going to be the lightest tone. A good example, you know, I like I said, I kind of use the traditional idea of black shade or lines, black shading, and skin or color, whatever. That's like in thirds, right? So this is a good example of like a value study. Like this thing looks, it's more traditional, obviously more neo-traditional, whatever. You know, I lined everything, I shaded it, what needed. But then for this white bear, you know, she wanted this little white teddy bear. I didn't want to color it white, you know, white yellows, you know, when you have big patches of white, yellows or browns or tans or whatever, that's all skin. You know, I did a little bit of periwinkle. Periwinkle is one of my favorite colors in Denver. Don't use it. Find any way you can use it. It's great and it lasts forever. I used a little bit of cut down periwinkle for the shadows of this left side of the bear, you know, around his head, but like that's all skin on the forehead and around the eyes. And you know, you're creating an optical illusion and it looks white, you know, and you can't deny that because it has that nice little black line and all that skin looks white. Same thing here. Those reels, those audio reels or whatever, that's all skin, and it's just because there's enough black around it, enough color around it, and complementary, like warm and cool tones, that you have that sense of white on that, and it's just the person's skin. Never forget to use the person's skin. That's less work for you, and you can count on that aging better that way. I like to focus on color schemes a lot in my tattoos. It's obviously something that's really important to find and make a style of some kind. You just want to play with color a lot. You know, don't hesitate to put a color wheel in your station. I mean, I have 2 color wheels in my station at all times. Something I look at all the time and study it. If you don't know about the color wheel, I encourage you to know about the color wheel. You know, it's pretty easy to look at and know what you're looking at. You know the colors, but realize how they have relationships together. Colors have relationships, and in your tattoo work, you know, that's something that's really important to realize what are complements and what are things that are gonna react with one another, especially on skin. It's different than like paper or whatever. Like color is really interesting on skin, and the way it heals is really interesting as well. But don't be afraid to use color theory in your tattoos. And if you're copying something, if you're doing a reproductive tattoo, like understand why you're looking at, like say, a portrait. You know, you're not just tattooing flesh tones. You're not just putting out peach and, you know, flesh and all that stuff. Like, there's a lot of color going on in skin. You know, there's warms, there's cools. You know, you can make a really dynamic, interesting image by using complements and by using tones that are, you know, you can have a bright tone, but you should have that complemented also by a dull tone. And by doing that, you're going to make interesting imagery. And contrast applies here too. You know, if you're going to have a bright, warm foreground, you should try and find a way to put some cools in the background. That's contrast, and that's something that, you know, you should not always. You can always break the rules, of course, but always think about. You know, think about. All right, my foreground's this way. What's my background need to be to make the foreground stand out more? Don't forget that. Here's an example of like a crazy color scheme. This was, you know, like a kind of abstract outer space type deal. It's a little, I don't know, warm here, but I mean that's like every color under the sun. I mean that's like Intenda's entire palette right there. But a lot of the times the planets were warm or they were cool, and so I needed the background to kind of change throughout this sleeve. You know, I have cool foreground elements, I have warm foreground elements. So if you let your eye kind of wander, every time the planets or the foregrounds change to a cool or warm, the background changes with it. So that way you can always keep those foreground elements forward. And it worked pretty successfully. Most of this is healed, and it's vibrant because the colors are packed in pretty heavy, but it's also vibrant because I created that contrast of complementary tones and mixing cool and warm from foreground to background. Really utilize that, it works. Same thing here, the background is obviously all cools, whereas the foreground is almost all warms. It pops out at you, you know? Heavy contrast with the black. There's actually a lot of skin. It's not completely rendered. A lot of those soft spots that stand forward above the eyebrow and on the cheek, that's skin. And don't be afraid to find your complements. Like I was saying before, if you look at the cheek, I don't know if you can tell, you can kind of tell in this, it's obviously all warm, this pattern, but on that cheek, there's skin, but it also grazed in that light greenish blue to kind of complement the warmth around it. So your eye would go to it and it sticks out. And there's like little olive tones here and there, and it's just to kind of break up that warmth of the animal. Find ways to create dynamics within your color schemes. And then don't be afraid to, either if you're gonna do a reproduction, something like this, don't be afraid to get in Photoshop and like enhance the colors that you found. You find a photo on the internet or somebody brings it in, don't be afraid to enhance those colors and see what colors come out. Pump up the contrast or lower it and play with the saturation and stuff. And I saw that, there's a lot of cool tones in that animal. You look at it from far away, it's like, oh, that's an orange or whatever, gold leopard. But really, there's a lot of colors making that image up. Don't be afraid to, pull out some cool tones for those shadows. And that's what pushes that chin of this guy back so the warmth can stand forward. So always look for ways to find your cools and your warms. Now let's talk about details a little bit. You'll notice too, like throughout these tattoos that I'm showing, that I try and showcase that I like doing all the styles that I do, right? So I showed some portraits and stuff, but also I'll talk about more illustrative things and stuff with a lot of line work. I like it all. So details are something that you can do anything you want with your tattoo work, and these rules are always meant to be broken. This isn't like a tried and true thing. This works for me. But with details, I like to remember a few key things when I'm designing things. When I'm designing my tattoos, I always try and remember to keep things in like odd numbers. For some reason, like odd makes sense in a visual way. So instead of having your foreground have multiple objects in it for no reason, make there be a reason. When you draw something, let's go to a visual. When you draw something for somebody based on their idea, or for you, you want to find a way to tell a story in the details. And so draw it with purpose. Don't just like, oh, I want a heart and a rose, or I want an hourglass with some diamonds falling out of it. Like, draw it with the idea that you're composing something that should flow with the body. And the details of a piece will kind of enhance that. I like to kind of remember to put things in an odd formation or whatever, group things in an odd way, as opposed to even, sorry, just to specify. Like, to me, I drew 4 diamonds originally kind of falling out of this thing, and it looked off. I don't know why, but this odd number thing always holds up for me. It's part of like, the Fibonacci sequence and Feng Shui with design and stuff. But always think like, okay, so my foreground, or not my foreground, my focal is the hourglass, but she also wanted diamonds kind of falling out with some sand or whatever. So I put a couple diamonds, didn't look right. I put 4 diamonds, didn't look right, and then I quickly remembered, like, oh, I need an odd number, and it just made it work quickly. And it's interesting. Try doing like a little couple practices with anything you do. Compare an odd or even type layout and see what happens. You'll always pick the odd. It's kind of strange. It just rounds things out really well. Also, if you're going to have detail and sharpness and focal points in the foreground, don't be afraid to make everything in the background or around it really, really blurry and soft. It'll allow that stuff to breathe. You want to leave some breathing room in your tattoos. And also, don't be afraid to busy things up. Things can be busy and crazy as long as you have a little bit of contrast in some of that detail. Things will make sense at the end. This is a really crazy busy sleeve I did a couple years ago, and it's really busy. But in every little section of it, I always try to find a way of creating a moment of breathing room. The astronaut itself I kept pretty simple, so we just made the background really busy, and that was a contrast. That was an element that made him, the simple astronaut, look like he was in a lot of chaotic movement, and I think it works visually pretty well because of the background being so busy. So, background and the non-focal point can be the busy stuff, can be the interesting things that people want to look at. For me, I like astronauts, but for some reason this simple illustration of it wasn't quite enough. So instead of doing planets, we did these ornaments. But I decided I'm gonna make those ornaments really crazy busy, and it worked. And it's interesting. I broke the rule of the foreground being the crazy thing, or the main focal point being the crazy thing. In this case, it's the background. So play with those details, and always remember odd works. Let's see, depth of field. I've talked about this a lot already, but we can reinforce it with some imagery. Here's a portrait. I had seen a ton of these Breaking Bad Walter White tattoos kind of surfacing, and a couple people inquired about them. And the only one I took on was one where he wanted a bunch of other elements. I didn't want to just do a portrait. I wanted to make a piece of art out of it. And you can do reproductive work and still be an artist. Like some guys that only draw their tattoos, they don't like guys that just do reproductive realism tattoos because they're not creating or not drawing. Well, I see what they're saying, but I also think us as artists, and if we do realism, if we do reproductive work, we can for sure be artists. What's the difference between tattooing a face and painting a face? I wouldn't say somebody that painted a face on canvas is not an artist. So what makes a tattooer that tattoos a face not an artist? That's a side note. But anyways, this one I wanted to create something special. I wanted to make a piece of art out of this guy, not just his face. I wanted to make it interesting, and so we created this, and it has a lot of these tricks, right? You have a lot of foreground sharpness within his face, and you have all of that background around it that's super, super blurry, super loose. It's not sharp at all. You go straight to his eyes. You go straight to the highest brights of the glow around that little RV at the bottom, and you go to that that pattern that's kind of fading off of his hat. And that's because you have certain elements of sharpness and you have certain elements of loose blurriness, and it creates something fun to look at. And don't forget to create something that's fun to look at. You want people to show this off, so create something that they can show off, and pull out all the stops. Pull out all your tricks, and just remember these key things. Contrast and foreground and background, and you'll find you're making consistent, interesting imagery. The same thing here. This girl. Everything on her is busy and detailed. Her bra and her shoulders, her neck is really her helmet. So I kept her skin really, really simple. I didn't add too much color. So the background and all her armor could really be interesting and sharp and stuff. Same thing here. You can kind of tell in the background. There's a lot of haziness and blurriness. There's no sharpness at all. So all that cool little beads and those earrings, the feathers kind of coming out of the back of the helmet can stand out, even though it's pretty much monochromatic other than their skin tone. There's a lot of contrast in the color, there's a lot of contrast in the detail, and value. There's a lot of light grays next in between all the blacks and the skin tone. So it creates something that's just stimulating. So remember that your process is going to be different today than it was a year ago. Your process is going to be different in a year from now. It's always going to change, and it always should. That's how we get better. If you just stick to what you know every day forever, your career and the quality of your work is going to stop. It's just going to sit there. You're going to plateau. Don't be afraid to modify your process. This is why you're here right now, right? Just getting to talk about it, I'm learning how to talk better and speak better and teach better. It's not something I do often, and I apologize if I'm not doing it great. But I think by me being up here, I get to practice doing this, and I enjoy teaching what I know and what works for me, and this just allows me to better my process. Remember that, if you want to be better, you got to work hard. I don't believe you achieve much in life without putting a lot in. Work really hard, you'll see results, plain and simple. Same as working out. Work really hard and do it in a way that you have some sort of educated format to do it. Don't just if I draw a lot, I'm going to be the best artist in the world. It's like, no, I got to draw with purpose, and I got to draw with kind of an element of, this is why I'm drawing this is why I'm teaching myself, or this is why I'm seeking out education. Don't be afraid to get on YouTube, or just do some Google searching and search what you're looking to draw, or search what you want to know more about, and that's going to stick with you. Research things. I've looked at my work for years, and I've seen progress, but I'm also I want to be better faster, and I'm almost 10 years into my tattoo career now, and I want to be way better than I am, and I think that's something that's not going to go away. I've decided I don't think I'll ever be as good as I want to be, but that's kind of exciting. That keeps me hungry to be better. I ask myself all the time, all right, how good do you want this tattoo to be? And it's always, I want this tattoo to be fantastic. Well, how do you make it fantastic? Apply all the things that have made your work better. Well, apply that, and it's gonna make that tattoo as good as it can be. And then as you're working on it, don't be afraid to take breaks. Don't be afraid to step up, analyze your work, and look at it, really analyze it, find out why is it not as good as you want it to be, or why is it working? Why are things working? And it's because you're either applying, the tools that that work, or you're not. Make your work as good as you want it to be. Even if you're not the best illustrator, the best painter, you can make beautiful work every time. Take your time, find out why and how to get there. I don't paint enough. I never paint enough, but I love painting. And this cross I did, it's a couple feet tall or something, 2 feet tall. It took me 50 hours to get to this point. I don't know why. It just took several layers. Kind of like before, I just did it step by step by step. I wasn't liking it. It wasn't working. But I was asking questions. I was learning online. I took a life drawing and a life painting class during the duration of creating this cross. It was for an art show, and I was just gaining knowledge. And I was asking friends, and I made phone calls, and I was texting people hey, what do you do if you can't build up a highlight on a skin tone that well? And my buddy was like, well, you just gotta mix a cool tone into your highlight so it stands off of the warm tone of the skin. And just certain little things like that. I just garnered and gathered all this knowledge over the course, I think it was 50 or 60 hours, that allowed me to finally get to a point where it's oh, okay, cool. I like where this is, finally. I mean, weeks and weeks and weeks went by, and finally I started to like it. And it's because I was gathering knowledge. And that's part of my process, is researching things and giving yourself the opportunity to learn, Here's another example of a reproductive piece. We've all seen La Pieta, Michelangelo's amazing sculpture. We've seen it done a million times, she's like the Marilyn Monroe of sculptures. I wanted to do it. Obviously, it's beautiful. It's one of my favorite pieces by Michelangelo, but I also wanted to make it different. And I wanted to make it unique for this person and for me. I wanted to show it off in a way that was hey, it hasn't been done before. And you know what it is right away. You can see the face, but I modified it. I made it my own. And don't be afraid to make things your own, Don't be afraid to, not every client's gonna be cool with it, but don't be afraid to ask, hey, can I make this portrait a little bit more special? Just like an illustrated tattoo, that's their custom piece forever. give them a portrait that's theirs forever. Nobody else has it. And yeah, that way you can kind of create your own style even in just being a reproductive tattooer. I also like to talk about line work a lot. You know, it's something that's really important to illustrative tattooing. It's not vital for all styles, but it is something that is important. And don't be afraid to make dynamic line work choices. If you're an illustrative tattooer at all, you know, you can find contrast just in your line work, and you know, that's in line weight, that's in you know, coloring with, you know, or, sorry, lining with colors. You know, there's a really cool way to make an interesting tattoo just in line work. And I've noticed this by years of just like lining sleeves and stuff. Don't be afraid to gray line. You don't have to black line everything. You don't. You can gray line a lot of things and make those decisions later to either bold them out or leave them subdued and light. But don't forget that line work is really important. And obviously, you know that make your lines clean. Consistency is really important. Slow down. If your lines aren't great, slow down. Like, I'm pretty slow with my line work because I want it to be good and I want it to be sharp. So when it's not going perfectly, I just take a breather, just take a step back, go back into it, slow down. Don't be afraid to slow down. If you're charging by hour, like if you need to, if you're worried about money, or they're worried about money, just tell them like, hey, like I'm not gonna, you know, you figure out what works with their budget. Don't worry about slowing down. Make your work great. You know, money is secondary. If you don't make your work great, money will eventually stop. Because if your work's not great, people aren't going to come to you. So always remember to keep quality over financial gain. With line work, I like to get in and out as possible. I don't like to dwindle and dwell on one area too much. Same as shading, you're going to beat it up. So if you have to go slow. Don't forget to keep moving because you can beat it up. This is a heavily lined piece. Pretty much everything in there is lined, but a lot of it's gray lines. A lot of it's thin, you know, type 3s and type 5s and stuff. And then I also close up, you know, around the crown. The line work there is healed. That's like a 7 round that I built up in 2 passes. You know, you can look at that crown, the contour lines in the foreground are really bold, whereas those little prongs in the back, those back 3 or 4 of them, those are gray line, like a dark gray line with a 3, and those are softer, and those get pushed back. So you see that the front end of the crown come forward, and those little back prongs stay back. You know, you can create visual dynamics and contrast just with your line work, and don't forget that. Now, something that I like to do, if I can, is do line work in realism. I think it's just a contrasting thing that makes realism interesting when you can. It's not always a good idea, but when I can, I like to do it. This is semi-realistic, but if I took that line work out of that skull, and it's lined, the whole thing's lined. If I took the line work off of it, it would look a lot more realistic. But because it was a neck, and I wanted this guy's skin, you can kind of tell, is a little sun-beaten and worn. I wanted to make sure it was going to stay sharp, and I wanted to create something that was visually stimulating, but also something I knew that could age a little bit better. So I lined the shit out of it. I lined everything. Obviously, those little fractals up front are simple, more illustrative pieces. But I mean, that's a really realistic skull for the most part, with a lot of line work around it. And that thing, you know, even on his shitty skin, I mean, that thing healed pretty damn well, and it's solid. I mean, it's like 4 years now, and I mean, it is dark, it is contrasting, you know what you're looking at, even with all those blacks. And it's because I have the contrasting elements of cool and warm. I have that simple background, it's just a wash of color, so all the sharpness stays forward. And you know, the value study of using the 0 of his skin for some of the lips of these little fractal shard things, and then all that pitch black. I mean, I have 0 to 10 and across the board. Don't be afraid to put line work around some of your realism. You know, it'll bring things forward. That little orbital edge around that main eye socket, that stands out just a little bit more because of the little line work around it. Shading, something that a lot of people will ask me is like, how do you get your tattoos so bright? I always tell them I use a lot of black. I get my tattoos to look really, really bright because I use a lot of black. It's contrast. But also, I shade pretty brutal. I want to get that pigment in the skin. Always keeping in mind that there is that level of what's too much, what's going to beat the skin up. I'm always pushing it to the brink of breaking. And some people aren't comfortable with taking that risk of, you know, really pushing the skin to its limit. But that's how I get my tattoos to be bright and stay bright. You know, we can all usually make a tattoo look nice in the beginning, but you know, what's it look like in a year when it's fully healed and it's seen some sun? Is it still bright? Is it still sharp? Using you know, smaller mags, I'm learning is a good way to really punch pigment in really well. Making it smooth is not always easy, but I like to develop it with a kind of a cross-hatching type effect. You know, I'll usually push my needle forward. I don't like to whip out like backhand. I like to push pigment in. And I usually will work in kind of a counterclockwise motion with my hand. But once I do that, and if it's not perfectly smooth and saturated, I will literally turn my body around or however I need to be to go the opposite way of that. You can blend your pigment by cross-hatching, whether you're just doing straight lines or little circles. You need to blend the other way because the skin, you know, you're not tattooing flat, you're tattooing over, you know, cylindrical body parts and muscles. You need to get it at every angle. Don't be afraid to move your hand. Don't be afraid to get around on the other side of that person's body and cross-hatch. And cross-hatching, you should all know, right? It's just layering like an X. You do it with, you know, markers or pencils too. Do it with your tattoos. Pack that pigment in. Here's a good example of packing color in. It's a little pinker here on this, but you know, this is a Warhol thing, but that is just solid yellow and solid pink. And the only reason it works is because all the black, you know, those tones are going to lighten over the years, but because of the black, it'll lighten naturally, it'll look good over the years. But that yellow, that pink, I mean, that is packed in. And I hurt this poor girl, but I've seen it. It's like 3-4 years old now. I mean, it is solid. You know, use good pigment, it's going to age well. Obviously, I support Intense, that shit holds. But it's also because I applied it hard. You know, I almost apply every color I do, almost every color, like I would if I was trying to get my solid blacks in. Remember, like, you know, you want your blacks as dark as they can be. Your colors should be as vibrant as they can be. And how do you get your blacks as dark as they can be? Pack that shit in. Pack your colors in hard. Realism. I love it. I like to think of my realism compositions and pieces similar to an illustrative tattoo. You know, create interesting compositions with really considering the foreground, anything that's interacting with the foreground. In this case, I'll show you in a second. There's some tentacles here. This is a recent piece I just finished. Don't be afraid to create something that is visually interesting, just as much the foreground as it is the background. This one, you know, there's a tiny little blue background because there was so much going on in the foreground with her and her face and all these tentacles. I didn't want to rely on the background doing much other than just contrasting it so it's black and dark blue. But excuse me. You know, this isn't realistic. This isn't a real thing. You know, this is like a Photoshop composition. But you know, I tried to make it something that was believable. You know, I didn't just find an image of this girl with tentacles coming out of her head. I made this girl with tentacles coming out of her head, and I just looked up a lot of tentacles and did the research to to put all this together. Like, this color scheme didn't exist anywhere, I made it up. I tried to find a way to make it an interesting, fun tattoo to look at, but also a believable image, like as if it were real. And that was by doing all the steps we talked about. And it's, lots of contrast, all that black hair next to that light skin. Same as black and gray or traditional stuff. Create the contrast in the color scheme. There's a lot of warmth in her skin tones, so I opted to do mostly cool background tones and stuff. And then the same as the tentacles, my client just wanted orange tentacles. I've never seen really bright orange tentacles, but I was like, okay, cool, I'll complement that. That'll complement well with the blue background. Done and done. But those oranges, to me, pop out more than most elements of this tattoo, and it's because there's so much blue. And I think that's really, really stimulating. I think that's a cool way to make your tattoos just jump out at you. Not just image, but also color. The color can really be special in realism. It doesn't have to be a perfect photocopy. If that's not exactly your desire, like to just copy the photo, like pump that shit up, make those colors a little brighter than they are in those photos. Just make it more fun, because tattoos age and they dull out. If you make them brighter in the beginning, as they age, they'll heal and age well into a nice tone, rather than if you make it just like a photo, sometimes in 5-10 years that tattoo is going to be so subdued and lifeless. So don't be afraid to pump up your color schemes. Whereas this one is the opposite. This is really basic, just copy of a photo. This is just reproductive. That's what he wanted. He didn't want me to do anything funky with it, and I did just that. The background of this photo of this kid was actually a warm tone. The only thing I did to change the photo was add a cool tone, because his shirt's warm, his skin's warm, his hair's dark warm brown. The only thing cool about it, honestly, was his eyes. So I tried to add as much olive, and it's hard to tell on some of his hair. There's actually like a bluish gray in there. And obviously his eyes have a little bit of they're like a dark green. But I added as much olive and coolness as I could into what looks like a warm piece. He's all warm tones, but there's actually cool tones in there, mostly in the shadows and in the shirt. But what makes this thing stand out and come forward is that blue background. And it wasn't there in the photo, and I knew it needed it. It needed that contrast of warm and cool. So don't be afraid, even if they want, just the photo, don't be afraid to do what you need to do to make sure that tattoo is going to last and age well and kind of separate and breathe a little bit. Here's a crazy tattoo that I did this doing a guest spot or something, and it's a big tattoo. I mean, it's his whole forearm from wrist to elbow. Yeah, you can kind of tell. I did, pretty much just a reproduction. I pumped up the blacks on Photoshop. It was a little lighter, the photo itself. Don't be afraid to pump up the contrast in your photo reference. If they're gonna allow you to kind of work with it, this guy wanted pretty much just this picture. He didn't want me to do too much artsy shit with it. Then do what you can at the forefront of it to make it so that it'll be a strong, dynamic tattoo. So I just literally blacked out that tree. I blacked out, all the shadows behind the bottom of his tail. And because of all that detail and the wrinkles on his back and those little spikes everywhere, I made the whole background really, really loose. There was more sharp leaves in it, but I knew it would get lost if I knew that detail on him would get lost if the background had any sharpness in it at all. So heavy black contrast and simple background to allow that detail to breathe. And also, this is arguable here. He's got a lot of green and cool tones in him, minus some of those pops of warmth. So, I could have opted for a warm background to allow those greens to breathe, but I knew that, those pops of yellow and orange on the tail, those were really going to be the standout of this piece. So I just knew what to do, put the cool in the background, and those yellows and golds really are what pop out at you. And I saw this heel a year later, and it had aged extremely well. And it's really because of all the black. All that detail on the wrinkles in the back, I mean, that's stippled in with a round shader, like I would like the detail of an illustrative tattoo. Just pounded that black in there, and the color aged really well right over it. But find those moments where, you know, something's gonna catch a viewer's eye. And I figured it was gonna be the face will always catch you, but there's always gonna be those little yellow rings, and it's just a little bit of it, but that's what you notice, and it's because of all the cool tones around it. One question I'd like to address is, will realism hold? It's a conversation I have with people all the time, and absolutely it'll hold. You know, I'm sure you guys have seen good tattoos that were realistic and that held really well, and some that have, you know, disappeared. I think if you adhere to a lot of things I've talked about, and it's stuff that other guys will really reinforce, is mostly that contrast that realism can definitely hold. It doesn't need a line, it just needs contrast. It needs soft, sharp, it needs you know, black, white, and everything in between. Realism will hold. I've seen tattoos by Bob Terrell and you know, obviously Black and Gray, and then I've seen tattoos by Demasi and DeVries that are 10 years old now, and they look great, and it's because there's a lot of contrast to them. The less contrast in some of these realistic tattoos that I've seen, they don't age as well. And if you can find a way to get as much black or dark tones next to all the soft skin tones and stuff, that shit's gonna hold. As long as you're putting it in right and you use this contrast stuff, it's really gonna last well. And here's something that I've kind of been dealing with for a while, or working on, is creating a foundation behind your portraiture that's, and not just portraits, but realism in general, is creating a backbone that's similar to like an illustrative tattoo. And we know illustrative tattoos are held up well by lots of black, sharp lines and stuff. For this Bane tattoo I did a couple years ago, and I've learned a lot since then, but I literally, you can see on the left, that was the first session. I think that's all I did the first session, was I lined it, or gray line parts of it, and did all the black, and look how, like, that looks illustrative to me. That looks like almost like a neo-traditional tattoo. But I let that heal, and I came back in and colored it all. And I pumped up some of the blacks that had lightened up a little bit, and went over some of the blacks with some cool tones or some warm tones to just soften some of the blacks. And it worked really well. And it's not like a really photorealistic tattoo. And that wasn't my intention, was to create just a photorealistic tattoo. I wanted it to just be a fun, interesting tattoo that looks kind of realistic. It's, you know, it's not like that super soft realism, but it's, you know what you're looking at. I mean, if you've seen Batman, you know that guy's face. And I think it worked really well. And then healed, I think it was approximately 8 months later, minus that blue in the top right corner, that was fresh. You know, that's fresh on the left, that's healed on the right. And you know, you can see how certain skin tones start to lighten up a little bit, but you're still looking at all the information correctly because of that black and black and gray backbone. That's still there. I mean, that's fully healed, except for that blue up on the top. That's fresh. You can see the difference. But I didn't touch the face at all. I didn't touch anything on the face. And yes, realism will hold. I've seen this thing 3 years later, I think it is, just kind of recently, and it looks like exactly the same as that. And I think it's because if you create like your underpainting or your backbone of the tattoo properly, you know, things are going to age well. I kept all that stuff sharp. Here's an example that is heavy on black, and this is an interesting tattoo because there's so much detail in every part of it, except for the background. But I really pumped up the warmth of his hair, the coolness of his armor, on his little shoulder right there. And then his face is somewhere in between. There's warmth and a lot's cool. You know, it's kind of an olivey, mauve, and weird skin tone, but there's warmth in his lip and his nose. And I try to pump everything up, like across the board. I made the blacks blacker than they were in the reference, and I made all the hue of each thing, I enhanced it all. So that way it pops out at you, and as it heals, you know, those exaggerated colors will get subdued, and then they will become almost even more realistic over time as it softens up. Here's a tattoo I did, shoot, like, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago. This was 4 or 5 years after it was done. Obviously, I've learned a lot since then, but, you know, this is a tattoo that's softened over time. You know, this was a 1-session tattoo. You know, you look at certain things, and pigment separates, and it'll lighten up in certain areas. One color will lighten up in certain areas because that person's skin or, you know, their tissue or they got cut or whatever. And certain parts of those colors will stay really vibrant. You know, it's good to look at your healed tattoos and see what's working. See what's holding. Obviously, black's gonna hold. Skin tones are gonna lighten. This works. You know, it didn't heal perfectly, and it's aging okay. But you know what you're looking at, and there's enough contrast there to figure out what you're looking at, and it's aging pretty well. But I look at this and I see, like, okay, like I need to pump up my skin tones more, and I need to not be afraid to add cool tones in skin, even if it doesn't have it. And always remember to look at your work and realize what works and what doesn't, and where to apply that in your future work. You know, I like to post stuff like this and share stuff like this. It's, you know, guys are afraid to post their healed tattoos because they never look as good as they do fresh. But, you know, this is how you learn. This is how you know, like, to make your future tattoos better for your clients, and they deserve that. And your work deserves to reflect on shit. And this is humbling for me to share. You know, like there's a bad heel a little bit here, and you know, I see the lack of sharpness in, like, the eyelashes, or too much sharpness in part of those bangs, and I see, you know, in the mouth, you know, you're losing some of the detail of the teeth that were prior, they were there. But this is something that I think should be open dialogue. Don't be afraid to, you know, talk about healed tattoos and what works and what doesn't. Humble yourself constantly. I know this shit does. When I see it come in, I'm like, it needs a touch up. Flow, always have flow. Follow muscle tone. I think that's really important. Don't be afraid to respect, like, you know, the Japanese tattooers. That shit flows with the body perfectly. Doesn't matter what style you're doing. Follow the muscle tone. You know, I know Guy just saying always talks about the S curve, and that's something I still to this day follow. Japanese traditional tattooing and, you know, biomech S curves and stuff. I mean, it's really important. Find flow within your muscles, and usually if you follow that S, whether it's forward or flipped, you know, you can find a good amount of flow by following the S and following that muscle. I don't want to talk too much. How we doing on time? I know I've gone for a while.
Let me start. It's not an hour.
We're done. Okay. Let's see. How about yeah, draw a lot. Should we do questions or something real quick?
Yeah, sure.
All right, cool. I know I talk a lot. There's a lot of information in this. There's still a little bit more. The last page of the pamphlet is something I don't even need to talk about too much. It's more so, it's kind of my state of mind, and something that I connect with tattooing pretty spiritually, and I like to give back to tattooing. I'll say this real quick. You know, I know a lot of guys feel this way, and I do too. You know, people ask you, where can they learn how to tattoo? And most people will say, like, I don't have time to teach. I don't want to apprentice somebody or whatever. And I feel that way all the time too. And I get asked often, like, hey, can I learn under you? Or my cousin wants to learn under you, can they do it? And I always say no, because I'm still learning myself. But I want to do more of this stuff because I think it's important to give back to tattooing, and it's important to give back to art. And somebody made a good point recently was, we talk shit as an industry on people who are like, the kitchen wizards and the hacks and stuff, and rightfully so. It's not cool. We don't want that, but I feel like as tattooers that have done okay for themselves and have made a name for themselves, or not, or just have learned how to be good tattooers, find a way to give back, because if you're not going to teach somebody how to tattoo properly, they're going to go and learn the wrong way. So share knowledge as much as you can, and obviously, don't just give free knowledge out for these kids that are going to remain kitchen wizards. But like, if somebody invests interest and wants to learn from you, give back, not to them, but give back to your industry. Give back to what can make this a more credible art form and a stronger medium by just teaching the right way of doing things. And even if you're not teaching them technically, teach them that, like, hey, go get an apprenticeship, go figure it out. Don't learn on your own in your kitchen. Go do it, go learn the right way. Even if that's all you give them, at least you're giving them that, and that alone is gonna make tattooing better. Don't hesitate to find a way to make tattooing better. I really believe in that. And we're oftentimes looked down upon in tattooing, and to a lot of people it's not a fine form of art, and I completely disagree with that. I think this is arguably one of the most beautiful and technically difficult mediums in the world. So who's to say it's not a legit form of art? So if you keep a good positive mental attitude and you apply that to tattooing, and that's with your peers and with people that are just collecting tattoos or don't know anything about tattoos, share positivity and knowledge with them, that's going to directly turn our industry upside down into a more positive, more well-received and respectable art form. And I encourage you to try and make tattooing a better thing to the world, because we know how rad it is, but the rest of the world doesn't know how rad it is yet. And if we do our part, to make it better and teach kids the right way how to get into it at least, then it's going to be better. And eventually, who knows? I mean, tattooing might birth, the next Michelangelo. I really truly believe we're the new Renaissance. Tattooing is the new Renaissance of art. So let's make it a good Renaissance, not some negative, shitty thing. Other than that, I just wanted to say that. If you have any questions too, we didn't get to go over everything, feel free to email me. I like talking about tattoos, so email me anytime, just say you were here, and I'd love to talk to anybody that wants to talk. And this weekend too, I'll be here all weekend. Does anybody have any questions about it?
Your email isn't here, right?
It should be, but if it's not, I'll give you a card or something. Sorry.
London, I had a question. Do you work with darker skin tones like African Americans, darker Hispanics?
Yeah, I do. If I'm just picky with the projects that I take on, so I don't really care what their skin is, as long as I feel like the project that they want is something that I can kind of connect with, then I'll do it. Yeah, and sometimes people with darker skin, they see bright colors and shit, and they think they can have that on them, and it's our job to educate them that I could apply it, but it's not going to heal right. So I like to educate when I can. So yeah, I'll tattoo dark skin. I tattoo a lot of Hispanics. I'm from the West Coast, so I tattoo a lot of Mexicans and dark skinned people, and usually I just do black and gray, But yeah, I'm not opposed at all. Everybody else? Cool. What's up, man?
When you're tattooing, your machine, a lot of people say to use a hard hitting machine for color, soft hitting machine for black and gray. When it's too hard, because I've literally scared the shit out of myself.
Yeah.
So you know what I mean? Like I've layered this too much, or I'm hitting too hard, and then I get scared and I turn it down.
Sure.
And then I'm fighting back and forth. So it's always been like a fundamental question: when is hard too hard when you're tattooing?
Do you mean like how you're applying it, or how the machine is running?
How the machine is running. Sometimes I'll turn it up, or I'll just turn my head up, and it's even like just dumbfounding. in there.
Yeah, well,
Or
if you're
you know,
turning it up, you gotta work faster.
Right, but when is that too much to the skin? When is it?
Well, obviously everybody's skin reacts differently, so you have to take, you can't I can't tell you one thing and it'll work across the board. You literally just have to listen and really pay attention to how that body is taking it. If it looks like it's getting beat up, you gotta get out, you know?
Well, no, I understand that part of understanding what the skin's gonna look like. I'm
Yeah.
just saying, like, do you color the same way you do black and gray? Or I mean, you do tribal.
Color as opposed to tribal?
No, are they the same?
Almost always, yeah. You know, like I'll fan color out, like
Right.
I'll let it get soft at the edges and stuff. But you know, like something like this, for example, I see it. You know, every inch of that tattoo is completely rendered except for like one little area around the lip. That's the client's skin. I applied all of that color like I would the black, just heavy and in there. And I work it until it's the way I like it. I don't like come back to it a bunch of times and think, oh, that needs to be better, because it won't heal well if you keep going over it back and forth. So I'm in there and I'm packing it until it's what it needs to be. Obviously, you know, like when you're blending things, the edges are going to be softer, but like, you know, around like the bridge of the nose, you can see it's a little bit darker than like where the forehead is. Like that's packed like black, and it's just a lighter color, so it doesn't look that heavy. But that thing healed great, and I mean it's really rich, and it's because I pack everything so insanely like rich. But yeah, I mean, and it is something you got to be careful of. You're going to see things get red and get worked really quickly that way, but just pay really close attention so you're not beating up the skin, but treat everything like we're black, you know, because that's how it's going to stay. You know, a lot of guys will do, and I'm not saying it's wrong, it just doesn't make sense to me. A lot of guys will just barely graze color on the skin, almost like a light gray wash, and it looks nice and looks soft and it has that aesthetic that a lot of people like. But as far as like a tattoo that's going to age, to me, I want to know it's in there. I want to know that it's rich, and that becomes a style thing, and how you want your tattoo work to age. But I want my tattoo work to age really well and be really saturated and really rich. I mean, that's the best way I can put it. But yeah, it's because I pack everything to the brink of like pushing it to the next level where it might not heal great. You gotta be okay with that and be okay with doing a touch-up if you have to. And it shouldn't be the money that drives these decisions. You know, a lot of guys are like, oh, I gotta get it done in 4 hours. I gotta get it done this one session. If you know you can get 2 sessions in or possibly get 2 sessions in, base it off of that, and you know, go a little bit longer than their budget so you can make that tattoo better. Who cares, you know? Or stop early and say, all right, come back and we'll finish it according to your budget. Don't make it about the money. Make your decisions based on what the tattoo needs to be. So.
Whenever you say you pack color the whole time,
Yeah.
you always have the skin tone open in a majority of your pieces, I would assume, right?
Yeah.
Do you pack all the way up to the skin tone? Or
No,
do you do
that's a good
tone?
question. I fan it out to a degree where it just the blend looks right.
Okay.
So like, we can go to something that has a little bit of skin. That's kind of, you can see on the forehead of that skull. That's a little bit better.
Doing that fan out?
No, literally that's just technique, just like whip shading almost, right? Like, so that, see the shadow of the rose on the top of the forehead?
Yeah.
That's all skin right in the middle there. It's not a ton, but that's all skin. And you can kind of see in that middle photo where that shadow from the leaf is, there's a little bit of redness. That's just skin irritation. Because I've just fanned out that light blue as smoothly as possible into the skin. But just in from that, I mean, that's packed.
All packed.
That's packed, yeah. And that's heavy concentrated black off that line. There's a line there, and then I just did a little bit of black, but I mean, it's in there. And then every color just pack, and then just whip it out. And then, yeah, you can allow the skin to breathe at the very end of it. But every color has that same layout, where like from the skin to that light blue, you know, there's the little whipped out edge. I do that with every color to find that smooth blend.
Okay.
so the black is solid to like a little fade out, and that dark bluish gray, same thing, solid over that like hazy black,
Yeah.
and then just keep doing that for every color.
So did you use solid white here anywhere?
The only parts I used white was on that rose right on the stem. Just those little dots on the stem and on that little bulbous part, and then a little bit here on this rose,
And nothing
and just
on the
just a
skull?
tiny bit on the bridge.
Nothing on the forehead, right?
There's a couple little dots to create some texture. You can kind of see those freckles above the bridge of the nose. I did a couple little dots just to create some texture. You can see it best in the middle one. But I didn't even pound those whites in. Those are just to kind of add to the texture. But yeah, there's not a shit ton of white in there. Don't rely on the pigment white. Rely on skin. That's one thing I've learned a lot as things age and stuff. Yeah, any other questions? Sorry, I'm taking so long. What's up, man?
With your sleeve composition, like on the astronaut one,
Yeah.
it's got that like S-curve flow that you were talking about.
Yeah, as much as possible, yeah.
Is that something you do in Photoshop with like a picture of the person's arm, or are you just doing it like flat on paper and then?
Just flat on paper,
Yeah.
and just keeping that in the back of my head when I'm applying stencils and stuff, and a lot of times with sleeves, it's hard to draw an entire sleeve and then piece it on perfectly. So I'll piece it together. I'll draw it on paper in sections, usually not like a full sleeve anymore. I'm just learning just to piece it together. Make your stencils individually and lay it out according to that muscle tone. But even in small tattoos, if you have just a tattoo just on a forearm or something, I'll design that with an S-curve within it. So it's not just following muscle tone, it's also within the piece, just to give it some life, so it's not just so static. So,
Flat mag versus curved, like for realism, what do you use a flat mag for? Like what effect are you getting with flat?
I like flat mags for packing color. I feel like I can just get things really, really smooth a lot faster. So I can get like my rich blacks and all my colors really, 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 really saturated with a flat mag, smaller mags I usually use. And then if I want things to be soft, like you were asking about those soft fade ins and stuff, I'll use a bug pin because it just feels more airbrushy at the end of it. You can kind of whip out and get things soft. But when I really want things packed, it's smaller flat mags. Anything else? All right, cool. Thanks, guys.